That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Gotta rock this place. Gotta rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this place. Rock this place.
Hello everyone! So we all know that medicines will not work if you do not take them. Yet, according to the World Health Organization, only 50% of patients diagnosed with chronic diseases take their medication as prescribed. Not following your treatment plan or not taking your medication as prescribed, that's called non-adherence or non-compliance. And it is one of the biggest challenges that pharma companies face today. My name is Stephanie and I want to welcome you to this episode of Data, Pharma and Fika, where we share knowledge, experience and expertise in the fields of data and pharma. But we're going to do it over Fika, so bring your cup of coffee or your tea and join us on the discussion about the effects of non-adherence from 3 different perspectives: the patients, pharma companies, and societies. And let's see if there are any solutions out there that can help with non-adherence. With us today is Jesper Hassel, who is the CEO of a Swedish company called Mevia that specializes in minimizing non-adherence and hence improving the data quality in clinical studies. Big welcome and thank you for being able to join us, Jesper. How are things? How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks, and thank you for having me.
We're absolutely delighted to have you here. We tried to make this corona-friendly by keeping a distance, loads of hand sanitizers, and we do have a very interesting and serious topic today, which is non-adherence. Why is non-adherence an issue? Why do people not take their medication as prescribed? Is it that they're forgetful, negligent? What's the deal?
I think there's probably a couple of thousand reasons why people don't take their medicines as prescribed. So,
Okay.
I mean, the one which is one of the major ones is obviously forgetfulness, that you don't remember to take your medicines.
Mm-hmm.
But apart from that, you also have sort of that you don't want to feel sick. So essentially, if you're taking a medicine twice daily or once a day, you're constantly reminded that you're eating pills, and that's obviously, not something that makes you feel like you're healthy, even though those pills are keeping you healthy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons. There's also aspects of people not affording drugs. So in certain countries where you have to pay for it yourself, so if you're not on insurance, you actually can't afford it. So even if you're prescribed something, you might not have access to it. There's I don't know. There's more.
But is it
I could
like
keep going? Yeah.
Is there a difference between different? So you said forgetfulness. I would say then in different age groups, people tend to forget more when you come up to a certain age.
I think there's a mix there as well. So I think the popular belief is that the elderly are forgetful, and that the older you get, the more you will forget your medicines. What we've seen, and I think most competitors as well, is that it's not really the case. If you get into sort of dementia, then of course it's an issue. But typically it's kind of the middle-aged people that are the worst. So from like your 30s to 50s, 60s, just because there's so much going on. So like my typical day doesn't look the same, or you have your routines, but I think in the same way that it's sometimes hard to remember if you brush your teeth in the morning because you do it every morning.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of all mixes together. And when we've done tests with elderly, it's typically been that they've been extremely compliant, just because it's, their routine day. If you're living in an elderly home or anything like that, is, you wake up, you get your morning newspaper, you eat your breakfast, you take your medicines, and then you have some sort of activity block, you have your lunch, you take your medicines, and then it sort of carries on like that.
There's a routine.
Yeah, and whereas, for most other individuals, you don't typically wake up the same time every day.
Yeah.
You sometimes have training in the morning, sometimes you're traveling. So there's just so much stuff that's happening, which doesn't always occur in sort of the elderly age groups. And this is obviously taken sort of in an extreme, and there's differences within that, of course.
All right, so we said that we're going to look at non-adherence from 3 different perspectives: the patients, the company, the pharma companies, and societies.
Yeah.
Let's start off with the patient's side here. What are the consequences of non-adherence for patients?
I mean, in general, obviously, you're prescribed a medicine because it's meant to help you stay healthy. And then it obviously varies between different therapies, if how affected you are. So if you're on sort of a blood thinner or something like that, then of course missing 1 or 2 pills isn't going to affect you drastically from day to day, but over time it will. So there's those issues which obviously affect how much the non-compliance sort of affects you. But in general, I mean, it's going to keep you from being as healthy as you could be. It may well hospitalize you. It means that you might get other issues as well because you're not feeling healthy. So I mean, I guess the quality of life obviously goes down for the patient, and that's on a specific patient note, I guess.
Can it also lead to you have to jump between different kind of medications because the doctor is trying to help that patient, but they're not seeing the desired effect, so you're kind of have to jump back and forth?
Yeah, so that's an issue as well. So obviously, if I'm prescribed a medicine and then I take that sporadically, and I go back to the doctor and the doctor asks me, how have you been taking your medicine? The general person will tell the doctor that they've taken it sort of as prescribed, or they might have missed a couple of pills. Okay. But most people want to be good. They want to have had adhered. So when you're put on the spot, you're most likely going to tell a semi-white lie.
Okay.
And for the doctor, that becomes a huge challenge, right? Because if I've taken 20% of my pills, or if I've taken 80% of my pills, there's a huge difference. And what we've typically seen as well is that doctors they will either look at the dose that you're getting, and if you're getting a 30 milligram dose, they might up that to 50, might up it to 100, which, I mean, to some extent might be okay if you're taking 1 of the 2 pills you were meant to take, because you're kind of controlling that dose yourself. But what then happens when you're hospitalized or when somebody else starts taking care of you is that they give you the full dose, which can then have massive effects on you, for sure, right? Okay. And as you said as well, obviously, if I'm on one type of medicine and that's not having an effect, and I'm meant to be taking it the way it's intended, then of course I'm going to be potentially switched to something else to see, will this other medicine have an impact?
What about the effects in the pharma industry, where one has to conduct several clinical trials, and each one can take several years, can cost billions of dollars? What happens if the patients that are enrolled in these studies do not take their medication as planned?
I mean, worst case scenario is you have a pretty lousy study.
Yeah.
So essentially, I mean, the clinical trials are all about getting data about the drug's efficacy or safety or whatever that might be. If you're running it in an early trial and you're looking at drug safety, if you have patients that aren't taking the medicines and therefore they're staying healthy, they're not having any side effects, a pharma company might look at that data and then go, well, this drug is actually safe because look, here's the data. And then you bring it into a larger study because that'll be the next step. And then patients start taking it the way they're intending to. That, of course, that can have drastic consequences for both the patient and for the pharma company, right? But in general, I mean, it's just a huge effect on both the data quality and the cost of the study.
Definitely. I would think that you're going to have to kind of recruit new patients, which prolongs a clinical study, which will cost even more money. It will delay it to launch. There are really like a chain effect on this that is severe. Exactly.
So I mean, recruiting patients into clinical trials is not easy. I think anyone who's been working in this field knows that. I know there's been studies done where essentially look at like the increase of adherence in a clinical study. So if you look at a phase 3 study as an example, if you increase adherence by 1%, so basically going from like 60 to 61%, that'll reduce the amount of patients you need by roughly 13 on average. With each patient in these clinical trials costing thousands of dollars, that's huge impact. And then also typically in these studies, you can have adherence levels which are down to 40, 50%, up to about 90. So if you can keep it high, then of course you can minimize the amount of patients, you can increase the statistical power, which is beneficial for all, essentially, right?
Indeed. I think it is really important to actually just emphasize the importance of a good data quality. You are basing decisions on that. So if that data is not good enough, you can make a faulty determination, which could have helped millions of patients, or you can actually decide to go ahead with the trial, and in that later phase realize that, oh my god, this is not working, we have to terminate now, but that was like billions of dollars just down the drains. So yeah.
I wouldn't want to be making those decisions.
If we stay in the pharma industry just a bit more, so when the pandemic hit, many drug development projects, they grinded to a complete halt. Clinical trials, they were paused because, one, quarantine, and two, because it was difficult to conduct safe treatments. So here, do you think that the patients that are enrolled in studies to a larger extent should take their medication at home in order to ensure that these clinical studies can push forward and stay on track?
I mean, I might be biased in this, but obviously the answer would be yes towards that. I think one of the potential positive outcomes of the pandemic is that you will look at clinical trials in a different way. So we saw prior to the pandemic that you were looking more into sort of digital trials, trials at a distance, trials at home. There's a lot of like kind of buzzwords around that. But I think in general, it is a pretty conservative business, which obviously means that you're looking at it and looking at these sort of innovative trials. But the real sort of larger trials are still conducted in the exact same way they have been for, I was going to say hundreds of years, right? But now we're really being pushed into trying to, okay, but how do we actually do this? Because if it's had it been a pandemic which was a month long and then everyone's fine and you carry on, then okay, great, that's, it's over. We can carry on the way we did. But now as the pandemic's carrying on, then of course you have to look at, okay, so how can we get these trials started again? And how can we start, developing these drugs which have, halted, and we're spending millions on the technically just being halted or stopped. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of changes in that. And then, of course, with that comes a greater responsibility on the patient side and on the pharma side to make sure that data is even more correct, right?
I was just going to say that it does put a bigger responsibility on the patients to actually adhere, take the medication as planned. Yeah.
And I mean, it's also a completely different way of onboarding patients as well, I'd say. So one of the issues, apart from taking your medicines in the way you're meant to, is obviously getting onboarded onto the trial. And a lot of those documents still need to be, physically signed or wet ink on and things like that. So I think there needs to be a continuous shift in that as well. But I hope, and I think we're seeing, the effects of actually pushing that forward now.
I really hope that works well. There is always this, I don't know if this is going to work, when there is a shift from theory to actually making it in real life. So fingers crossed.
For sure.
Lastly, we have the society's point of view. What are the consequences of non-adherence for us all?
In general is, I guess, personal suffering to some extent. So, as an example, if your grandparents or parents or siblings or whoever that might be is taking medicines and they're not doing that correctly, you'll obviously see their health deteriorate. You'll be worried about them, or hopefully worried about them if you care about them. And of course that obviously has a negative impact. I know with my grandparents, as they sort of got older and were eating more drugs, you also knew that some of these are really important that they take daily, because otherwise they will start deteriorating. And to some extent, I think especially that older generation are also, they're not really good at asking questions to doctors. Like there's still that aspect of, okay, so I get these pills, like, okay, I'll take them. Yeah. And one of the aspects, and this is sort of an example from real life, where grandma had been at the doctor's, received these new pills. I think this was on like a Tuesday, and we were there on the Sunday, and she was basically saying like, could you look at this and just tell me how I'm meant to take them? And I mean that's one of those things where it's like, okay, it's somebody who wants to do it correctly. They've been in a scenario where they've received it. They've most likely received the information, but at the time weren't able to take that information in because they might have been slightly traumatized by their development or whatever that might be, and had there been a service that actually just helped them out, or that also told us that she's not taking her medicine the way she's meant to, that would relieve a lot of that worry, and that worry gets slightly more intense for every single one of those small questions you get, because you get more and more kind of wary of what might be occurring there. Right?
I hope you helped your grandma in that
Yeah,
case.
we sure did. No,
She's taking them now.
She's
Everything
taking them
is
now,
well. Okay, great.
so it's going okay. But I think that's obviously one of the scenarios. The other one essentially is always if you're hospitalized. I mean, this is regardless. I mean, like if somebody random isn't taking their medicines and they're hospitalized, like technically in a country like Sweden, I am paying for that, because when they reach the hospital, our welfare system rightfully takes care of them, but obviously that's also on my budget. I mean, it's not. I'm probably paying like a cent, but it still is coming from that, right?
It is a big thing. I was actually just reflecting also. So we said before that it is a chain effect. So if a pharma company is trying to develop this medicine and it's paying a lot of money because these clinical trials are not going the way they thought, people are not taking the medication as prescribed, so they're recruiting more patients, paying more. When it actually hits market, there's a lot of money that they have to gain back because if the costs were so high. So the medicine becomes more expensive. And in a country like Sweden, we have a ceiling on how much we pay for medicine. So when you hit that ceiling, which is like a fraction of what the medicine actually costs, it is the tax money that pays for that. What kind of methods exist on the market that can help manage or increase adherence? And are there any drawbacks to those?
Yes and yes. I'd
Yes
say
and
to
yes.
that. So
Go
there's thousands of different solutions essentially. I mean, everything from if you have a calendar on your phone, like you can put in your medications there technically. I mean, it's not meant for that specifically.
Yeah.
You can set up your own reminders. You can put on alarms on your phone or on any random device, right? So that's kind of the most basic versions of it. Then you get into different types of reminders apps. I looked from now and then. I look in both like Google Play and Android or Android Store and Apple Store, and there's thousands of different types of medication reminder apps and things like that.
Oh, there are.
And also of varying quality and varying sort of how they work and how effective they are, I think. And then you go into different types of packaging. So both with like pill bottles, there's solutions connected to blister packs. You have sort of these dose pouches and pill dispensers. So there's like a plethora of different types of solutions out there. And I think with every single solution, there's also a drawback in it. So for me at least, with things that are just in your calendar, or if it's just on the app side or anything like that, there's an aspect of double compliance. So in one aspect, you have your reminder on the phone, you look at that reminder and you're kind of like, yep, or you click on something or you snooze that alarm or whatever you do. That's the first compliance, right? That you mark in the app that you've taken it. Now the app or the calendar is not going to give you another sort of reminder because you've already taken your meds according to the app. But it doesn't say anything about your interaction with your actual medicine. So I mean, as an example, if I would have my phone on the table here and it pops up, that I'm meant to take whatever drug it is, I'm most likely going to click that away quite quickly because
You're not going to go away.
No, I mean, I'm not just going to leave. And also because it might be something which, it might be a medicine which I don't really care to show you that I'm taking, or I don't want to show that I'm taking medicine for whatever reason. So I'm most likely going to click that away. And the best way for me to click it away is to click it away so that I know that I'm not going to get another reminder for it. But if we sit here for another half hour, I'm most likely going to forget that I clicked it and then completely forget that I should take my medicines. So that's like the app scenario, right? And then with all the other solutions, there's pros and cons of how effective they are, how easy it is for the patient. And then, of course, there's with every solution, there's a cost related to it as well. So it's a matter of getting more as well. Yeah.
So this is kind of your specialty. This is your field. What is Mevia's solution? Tell us about that.
So Mevia's solution is pretty broad as well. So I think what we've realized when we're working with this is that there is never a perfect fit, because patients are different, individuals are different. I mean, it's essentially in the same way that nobody buys the exact same car. Nobody's going to buy the exact same, shirt or whatever. So what we've built is essentially an extremely flexible platform. And we've looked at scenarios where, okay, there's individuals which really want to take their pet pills, and they're quite able to do a lot themselves. So in those scenarios, something like an app or sort of two-way text messages or just reminders could be good enough. There's scenarios where it's too basic and you're not sure of how the patient is actually doing. Then we have sort of hardware solutions. And in those, we can see in real time per pill what's happening. So essentially, you have a connected package where when you push out a pill, that information is sent directly to Mevia. So regardless if you have any sort of Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or smartphones or whatever,
You're not getting away.
as long as you're somewhere in the vicinity of some sort of cell tower, which at this point covers most of the world, then we'll get that information. And that can be, in a scenario where we, from a pharma company's perspective, just want to collect data. So we might not actually want to remind you. We might just want to see how does somebody actually interact with their medicine. It could be that we're trying to, help you out and send reminders.
So if you need to take a medication at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you see that they did not take that pill that morning, can you within an hour send a text message, hey, do not forget your pill? Yeah,
we can harass to any extent possible. I was going to say so that's also one of the things. I mean, we've conducted numerous studies on it and numerous tests where obviously you and I are going to be different in how we want to interact with it. Like I typically want an SMS or some sort of push notification before I'm meant to take it. So if it's coming up to 8, I want to get something like 10 to 8 saying, don't forget your meds, kind of thing. Whereas, some individuals, they get almost offended by that type of message because they're kind of like, well, I know it's 8. I know I need to take my medicines. And they only want to get a message if they forget. So in the solution, there's obviously an enormous flexibility in that as well. And what we typically try to do is become start less invasive and then go to more invasive. So going from push notifications to SMSs to potentially automated phone calls to kind of up the level.
Actually getting home.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, in sort of a home care scenario, that's kind of one of the setups as well, that you first send it to the patient. If the patient doesn't react upon it, then you send it to the home care personnel, and then potentially send it to relatives if you need to, right? So you can do that sort of thing as well. And it really, from a technical perspective, everything's possible. But I think it's more on a user level, what is the user happy with, right? The actual patient or the home care or the pharma company in a clinical trial.
But there is always, as you said, nobody's going to like everything the same. So it is good to have that kind of flexibility. What are the improvements and benefits that clinical trials or clinical studies have seen when working with Mevia?
I think there's a couple for sure. I mean, obviously, we don't always, and this is important to note with all adherence tools, is that you don't always increase adherence. There's not always we think that it's meant to be this and then it increases. So what we typically show is the real adherence, and we can do that in real time. So there's a much sort of better granularity in the data. That's the number one aspect of it. And then, of course, when it comes to doing pill counts and things like that, of course, you need to still do certain checks on that to make sure and validate that the Mevia data is correct. But you minimize a lot of time when it comes to that sort of aspect as well. and hopefully, I mean, this is still in theory, we're still a little bit too young, but hopefully over time, of course, also bringing down the amount of patients needed in clinical trials. But that's obviously in correlation to, how adherent have they been, how well have they followed protocol, right?
Yeah. Well, we do live in a world where there is a lot of uncertainties. We do not have to add another one. So if we can measure it and get correct data, that's awesome. So considering everything we talked about today, one would think that these kind of solutions are widely used today. But the truth is they're not. How come that is?
I think you'll have to ask pharma companies and clinical research organizations.
Will do, but if you have something to tell us.
So I mean, my theory about it is obviously that it's an industry which is very risk averse, right? So you don't really want to introduce any form of uncertainty ever, right? And the issue with sort of Mevia as a company or other adherence companies is that we have, even though our tools aren't per se new, they're still new in those circumstances. So you have a legacy of how clinical trials are run, where you jot down everything on paper, and then you collect the paper from the patient, you look at that, and then you put it into an electronic record, basically, right? And there's an extremely documented way of how you deal with that. And it's really easy because everyone knows it. Everyone knows it's not perfect, but everyone knows how it's done. And then you introduce tools like ours, where you're going to get more data than you get on a piece of paper. You're going to be able to get it in real time, and you're going to be able to look at, okay, so not only the paper itself, which there's numerous studies which show that a patient fills that out just before they go into the doctor's office.
Definitely.
Yeah, which I mean, I think most people can relate to. And the issue, of course, with our types of solutions is that if a patient does that, we will, allow them to put it in and say that they took their pills 3 weeks ago and so on, and fill that in, depending on sort of the setup. We can allow them to do that. But we will also timestamp it with when they did it. So that provides like a completely different level of granularity, which allows sort of you to look at that data. And if you look at my data and you see that, okay, well, Jesper filled in 3 months worth of how he took his pills like 5 minutes ago. And if you've been filling it in, perfectly 5 minutes here and there from when you actually took it. And if you've had really good effects and I've had, no effect of the drug, you can start look at those data points and realize that, okay, well, Jesper's data might not be as trustworthy as Stephanie's, right? And at the moment, you can't do that, because if I deliver a piece of paper with it filled in, you can look at it and you can see that this is the same ink and it's not
Gut
quite
feeling,
dry, but
yeah.
you can't question it in the same way, right? So there's a lot of those aspects which I think you don't really know how to deal with it at the moment, and also can you trust these tools, and do they work in the perfect way, and can patients utilize them? I think, as we've discussed sort of previously, there's the aspect of recruitment into trials being a major issue. So if you add tools like Mevia, and if you think that patients won't be able to utilize them if they don't have a certain technical ability, or if they don't have a certain type of phone, or whatever that might be, that obviously means that exclusion criteria increase, and you want to keep the exclusion criteria at a minimum in order to be able to have as big a population as possible to potentially test on. So I think that's something which will also be removed. I think there's still a general concept that 60-year-olds, they don't have smartphones, they don't know how to utilize them, and I think in general, at least my parents are well into the 60s. They're not the most technically adept people, but they utilize them. Like they know how to write an SMS. They use way too many emojis and things like that, but they know how to do it, right? So I think a lot of those things, they've shifted, but like the mindset maybe hasn't. And to some extent, I hope that that's shifting faster at this point as well.
You already mentioned some of these factors. So what are the new ways, the new methods that pharma companies will start using in the future to tackle non-adherence? Do you think it's going to be one method or a combination of different methods?
I think it's going to be a combination of different. Obviously, because there's so many different reasons for it, I hope that we will try to measure as much as possible to actually see what's happening. But I mean, compliance, there's a lot of different issues to it, right? I mean, one thing which I know pharma companies are working on is obviously to make the medication regime as easy as possible. So having 1 pill per day is easier than having 5 pills per day and at different time points and things like that. So there's a lot of work going into that. But at the same time, there's only so much that can be done with that, and only so much, in the form of administration of the medicine, of how that's being done. So I think there's a lot which is going to be happening there. And then I think tools or hopefully like Mevia's, will continue to be utilized. And I think also there will be, more kind of patient support programs in form of, when you receive a medicine, that you get a better onboarding plan for it, that you get reminders connected to it. I think what we've tried to pitch in a lot of scenarios is that, okay, well, if the sort of hardware solution is a little bit too complex or too expensive to be utilized with some drugs, then what you could do is have like your 30-day onboarding with that, which teaches the patient exactly how they're meant to use it. And then after 30 days, you can, move them onto a reminder type system. But you've like introduced that habit, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of shifting between these different types of things, and hopefully within different sort of medications that you have, different setups, right? So, but I think it should be inevitable that we move more and more into that sort of digital support phase.
I hope so, because data quality is super, super important, and this is one way to actually measure it and get good data. I'm actually curious to know what piqued your interest in this field. What inspired you to go down this path?
I think, as always, it's sort of random occurrences over time. So I mean, in essence, we looked at this while I was at university, and we saw sort of a couple of patents around a solution of monitoring and seeing when an object was removed from a package, and then looking at sort of different scenarios where this could be utilized. We kind of thought that, okay, well, when you take your pills, you don't always remember how to do it, and then it did not take especially long when you started like digging into that to realize just how big of a problem this was. And I think for me, it's always been an aspect of, when you look at what you want to do in life, I've always had like medicine and the doctor path somewhere in there. And then when I was choosing to study, I realized in Sweden that even if you have top grades, you have like everything set that you should be able to become a doctor, there's still so many people applying for it that you might not be able to get it.
True.
And then I kind of went like, okay, is there another way which I could go around this? But kind of went like, okay, I'm not sure if I want to work with patients in that way. I don't know if I could handle it myself to always see that suffering. And did industrial engineering instead. But also through that, realized that, okay, I don't typically just want to help in certain scenarios where you might be helping companies that aren't doing good for the world, that are creating more sort of climate change or whatever that might be, and shifting into the space meant that we could have like a triple win to some extent. Like we could create a company which has a possibility of becoming very profitable and do good. We help patients, so hopefully we increase quality of life. And then we also increase, pharmaceutical companies' sort of revenues, or we increase the data in clinical trials. So hopefully there's kind of a win-win-win scenario. And I think that's kind of what at least keeps me driving in this way, I think.
And so Mevia was born in all of that.
Sorry, it's a long explanation for a
no,
short
that's
question.
great. So Mevia was founded a couple years back. How is it to be a Swedish startup in the pharma industry and working towards the rest of the world?
Challenging, I'd say. So I mean, I think being a Swedish company, so far at least, Sweden has we're known for being pretty innovative. From a tech perspective, we can utilize that we've had these tech companies in Stockholm and things like that. I think everyone respects Sweden as a company from that perspective. Obviously, a challenge is that we're a tiny country.
I think there is like a change going on in the pharma industry where people want more data, want to make a better use of the data they have, more robust systems. And it is all to kind of help their analysis and help their decision making. So it is kind of cool to be in this field right now and to kind of help with that data quality. As we said, it is an exciting field, but the topic of adherence or non-adherence, depending on which angle you want to see it, is even more vital, I think, and more work is needed. So I think it's great that you are working in that field. And this is actually this concludes our interview. So I want to thank you so much for coming here, for discussing this very interesting and very important topic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. It is important to share knowledge and experience just like Mevia did, because we continuously face new problems, new ideas, and new dilemmas, and we need to learn new ways of working if we want to adapt. Not taking your medication as prescribed is a complex problem in the pharma industry, but there are many solutions out there, and Mevia is developing one of them. If you want to know more about Mevia's solution or want to contact Jesper, you can do so at his email jesper@mevia.se, or you can go to their website mevia.se. And if you have any questions or feedback for us, do not hesitate to send us an email at podcast@captario.com or go to our website captario.com. I will have these links and emails in our description field, so no worries if you do not remember them. My name is Stephanie, and I want to thank you so much for listening and for tuning in. I hope to see you in the next Fika, in the next hot topic. Stay safe and stay tuned.